of profit maximization, all firms, whether they're monopolist or whether they're perfectly competitive, all firms maximize profits by producing the quantity where the revenue generated by the last unit is equal to the cost of the last unit. And then they're going to charge the highest price people are willing and able to pay, which is given to us by the demand curve. So there is the price that they'll charge. This is the quantity that they'll produce. All right, so now the last part. I said this is long-run equilibrium. Our prediction in the long run is that profits are going to be zero. So I saved this one for last because it has a special spot. We still need to follow all the properties of average total cost. So watch me draw it and then you draw it yourself. You're going to come down, it's going to be bowl-shaped. It's going to just kiss that point right there. Still needs to hit the marginal cost curve at the minimum point, and then you can finish off your bowl. This one's a little bit tougher, but that's what it's going to look like. All profit opportunities have been seized by entrepreneurs out in the market. Economic profit equals zero. Okay, so how about some of our measures here of efficiency? We've been doing this with each one here. So, allocative efficiency, question mark? Does this market get us allocative efficiency? I hear yes. Where is the allocatively efficient quantity for society? What intersects what? Marginal cost and demand. Good. Is that quantity allocatively efficient for society? No. It is similar to what we got for the monopolist. It's being underproduced. So marginal cost intersects demand here. And so that is the allocatively efficient quantity. So, no. Number two, is it productively efficient? Are we producing at the minimum of the average total cost? No. The minimum is right there. Is the minimum of the average total cost curve, and again, we're off to the left. So productive efficiency, no. The market's here, and allocative and productive efficiency are off to the right. Now, we do get economic profit equal to zero. That's a nice result, similar to what we found in competition. So economic profit equals zero. The firms are earning a normal profit due to competition. So it's got that going for it. What happens to this question here of the difference between the market quantity and the allocatively efficient quantity as there's more and more alternatives? So imagine my story here. As people entered the market, there was more and more alternatives. It became flatter and flatter. What's happening to the market quantity? Is it approaching the allocative efficiency or drifting away from it? Is it drifting away, so it'd be going further? So what you should be trying to visualize, and of course now it rained yesterday, so I don't even have my umbrella. How heavy is this? I want to kill myself in a minute. All right, 2 erasers. As we start to have more and more substitutes, it gets flatter and flatter and flatter. What's going to happen to the market quantity? Is it going to drift to the right or to the left? Try to visualize that. This is getting flatter and flatter. This is following it because it's twice as steep, it's going to the right, right? So it's starting to drift this way. In fact, if it got really, 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 really flat, almost perfectly horizontal, what are we approaching? Perfect competition, right? So as we have more and more competition and it becomes flatter and flatter and flatter and flatter, the point here is that this becomes less and less of an issue. We don't have the huge waste for society that we did with the monopolist, because the availability of substitutes is nice in that it gives the consumers variety, but also the flatter this gets, the more we have the market quantity drifting to the right. So I wanted to add that onto this. The correct answer is no and no, but I want to give it a big but. But more elastic demand makes Q star, the market quantity, approach the allocatively efficient quantity. We start to make this diagram look closer and closer to perfect competition. All right. So some people argue that that is the price we pay for having some variety. Is that we get some additional benefit just from having choice. So apparently in the United States, since we don't outlaw this, in fact we encourage it, the belief is that variety of product gives more social benefit than the waste, and maybe I should put small waste since we're approaching allocative efficiency, than the small waste created by monopolistic competition. Now notice most of our goods and services that we deal with are in this arena, but we're spending the least amount of time on it, probably of all of our models. And the reason is we've covered most of the benefits with perfect competition of why we'd want it. We see that it approaches it, and most of the chapter, it's a short chapter by the way in the book, focuses in on the product differentiation and the benefits of it. Okay, I think the last thing I might add on to this before we move on to an oligopoly is what we talked about was ways firms differentiate themselves. Ways firms differentiate. Just so you have it in your notes here. So we talked about packaging, advertising, possibly ingredients or different inputs. A lot of times this also comes into bundling of goods. we don't spend as much time on bundling. So what I mean by bundling is bringing servers come out to you maybe at I ate at Five Guys yesterday. Anybody not eat at Five Guys? How many people have never eaten at Five Guys? All right, unless you're a vegetarian, you need to make it to Five Guys. It rocks. So when we were there, a person, one of the staff came out and asked us if they could refill our drinks for us. Now, does that always happen at McDonald's and Burger King? Is that kind of standard practice? No. So they were offering a differentiated product in that even if the hamburger was exactly the same, kind of the way they're providing it through the service that's integrated with the product is slightly different. So that's a good way that monopolistically competitive firms differentiate, is by bundling things together, kind of packaging it in a nice way. Okay. Any other comments, questions on that market structure? Okay, so oligopoly is kind of a fun word to say, but it's even more fun to discuss than these. We're going to look at a different type of interaction of firms. So the key characteristic that's different is that there's only a few firms. And because there's only a few firms, one firm's action has consequences on the other firm. Whereas that might not be true at all. We talked about Farmer Tom, Dick, and Harry each being a drop of water in the bucket, and it didn't matter what the other one does, right? They were price takers. But now with an oligopoly, decisions by one firm will have implications on the other. All right, so oligopoly. The key feature is that there is just a few sellers acting strategically. Because one firm's actions have impact on the other firms. So we say that the firms are interdependent. There's an interdependence of firms. Interdependence of firms. Another way to look at it is that you can't maximize profits by purely acting independently. Somebody else's behavior is going to cause you to make money or lose money too. So the firm can't maximize profits independently. Is a consequence of this interdependence. All right, so you might think that economists are pretty straight-laced, and for the most part, you would be absolutely correct. But we're going to get kinky today and talk about the kinked demand curve. Watch out, economists gone wild. The kinked demand curve. All right, so the kinked demand curve has strategic behavior outlined with the pricing. So this comes down to pricing behavior. our assumption of the model is, number one, if one firm lowers their price, the other firms will blank. So if we're in a situation where we've got Ford, GM, and Chrysler operating in the U.S. automobile market, so we've got a few firms, and we're thinking about pricing the four-door sedan. Each one has their own differentiated four-door sedan in a certain price point. What do you think other firms would do? If Ford cuts their price, what is GM and Chrysler likely to do? Cut their price, right? They got to match it to stay competitive. So that's our assumption of the Kinked Demand model here, is that if one firm lowers their price, the other firms will also lower their price. Number two, if one firm increases price, the other firms will, and then let you guys catch up so we can think about that, blank. So one firm cuts their price, the others cut their price. If one firm raises their price, what do you think the other firms would be likely to do? Keep it the same, right? So if we start to think about them sharing the market in a sense, and there's only three firms, if one firm increases their price and the others don't, well, they're going to keep more market share, right? They're kind of slitting their own throat. So it's just the opposite effect here, we think, is if one firm increases the price, the other firms will not increase price. All right. What I want to do next is look at the implications of that in our marketplace. So I want to draw two demand curves. Maybe we'll use the car market. And I want to think about a demand curve that looks like this and a demand curve that looks like this. And my question is, which demand curve represents U.S. autos and which one is the Ford? So I got two demand curves up on the board. One's flatter than the other. Which one represents the Ford? Which one represents U.S. autos in general? Steeper one, U.S. auto. Why do you say that? Who said that, by the way? Brad?
I don't know, I'm just assuming sort of monopoly that demand curve looks like, but all U.S. autos.
All right, your intuition is good, and it's worth an extra credit point, but your explanation needs a little help. So, Brad. All right, so your gut was good. I like, because you were kind of thinking U.S. autos, like it'd be more like a monopoly, right? Is what I was hearing you say if I was interpreting it right. So I kind of like that thinking. And so the other one would be over here. So tell me a little bit more to add on to Brad's comments. That was a good gut feeling. I just want a little bit more of an explanation. So he's saying this is U.S. auto and this is the Ford. What else could you tell me about that, of justifying why that would be the case. Okay, yeah, you're right. I mean, if Ford does something, right, then the other ones, I'm not quite there to analyzing this perfectly yet, but which one has more substitutes, Fords or US Autos? Fords, right? So if we think about the options available to the consumer, they can have a Ford, GM, or Chrysler, but they can also have a BMW, a Mercedes, a Toyota, all the other foreign cars. So US Autos have substitutes available to them too, but the Ford has more because it has other US Autos plus all the foreign cars. And the more substitutes, the flatter that demand curve is. Just like what we saw moments ago with the fast food hamburger industry. All right, so there's our setup. Demand for a Ford, demand for US Auto. Now, it seems like all the action in econ class happens where the lines cross. So let me come up here and just say that, suppose we take this point here at 20,000 Fords now, being sold at 20,000 bucks a pop. Maybe it's the Ford Taurus, some sort of four-door sedan. Now, if Ford raises their price to 22,000, what happens here with the demand curve that they follow? Do they follow this curve or this curve? In other words, where do we move from point A? Do we end up coming up to here or over to here if the Ford, using these assumptions, if the Ford increases their price? Do we move to B or let's call it C, I guess? Which point do we move to? B. That's right. So along a given demand curve, there was things held constant. Things like what? What were things held constant? Those were the things that shifted. So this final exam is not cumulative, but it kind of is because the things that we learned in Chapter 3 you actually have to know for the final exam too. So it's not technically comprehensive that we're only going to cover these last chapters, but at the same time I'm asking you a question that you had been tested on in Chapter 3. What were the things that shifted the demand curve? Demand shifters. Let's just name a few of them. There's about 5 we went over in class. Technology was with supply. Population, good.
Popularity.
Popularity, taste or preferences. Yep. Expectations, good. We haven't hit the one that I want, and then I'll stop. Income, good. Now we're going to have to go to 5 because we still haven't hit the one that I want. Price of related goods. Price of related goods like, oh, the price of a Chrysler, the price of a GM, right? The price of a related goods, the price of a substitute in this case. Those prices are held constant, and so we move from A to B. All right, now, if Ford cuts their price to 18,000, thinking that, oh, I'm going to gain market share, aren't I? My economist said that this is my demand curve, and so am I going to move to point D? No, because that assumes that my competitors held their price constant. But we've changed that. If Ford lowers their price, their competitors will also lower their price, and so US Autos in general will become cheaper. Ford won't sell as many Tauruses as they would had they been the only one to lower price, but that's not going to happen here. We're going to have a movement to point E. All right, so that's the dynamic that's happening. Let's get rid of data we don't need. If Ford raises their price, they're going to move from A to B, so let's just get rid of this. If Ford lowers their price, they'd like to go to here, but it's not going to happen. They're going to go to here. So let's get rid of this, and through the magic of multimedia, voila, a kinked demand curve. There's your kink. The kinked demand curve. The kinked demand curve has a marginal revenue curve that's weird looking also. It's still going to follow the same properties as it did before, but it's going to change depending on where we evaluate it. Pre-kink and post-kink are going to be a little bit different. And so we're going to be twice as steep as the demand curve as we head down this way, but then we start following this demand curve, which brings us to something that looks like maybe this. And so you've got this disjointed marginal revenue curve that we can maybe just connect this vertically. And that is effectively the marginal revenue curve with the kinked demand. The reason that's important is that we say prices tend to be sticky, because no matter where we draw a bunch of possible marginal cost curves, 1, 2, or 3, the result we get is the same. A Ford Taurus is 20,000 bucks. So we have sticky prices is a conclusion that we get from the kinked demand model. Since we're almost out of time, I just want to leave you with this. Economists generally view this model as suck. And so we've come up with a lot better tool to analyze strategic behavior. This one's gives us a little tiny bit of insight. I'm not completely wasting our time, but kind of sucks. And I'll explain why on Monday. Have a good weekend.